straight away. Watch by Nieto. There's Larkin, shoots, score! On the rebound, Perron! Power play goal, 4-1 Red Wings.
Larkin working the goal line, gets it out in front to break it, scores!
Knocked away, here's a break. Dylan Larkin with the break it. There's score!
Play by Larkin. Whoa.
Larkin goes to the slot. Back out for Giroux. Score! 2-1 Red Wings.
Oh, welcome back to the Spiro Avenue show. You know, we've been hearing that song a lot lately in the first few games. Max Bultman, welcome back, man.
Hey, no, my pleasure. It has been. It's a pretty good song choice too. The first time I heard it, I didn't know if it was going to be like a rotation of songs or if they would stick with it. I think it really works.
What is it like there? Does that work in the venue? I have not been down there yet.
I think it does. I think it sounded great on that. I mean, you obviously got great producers going for you.
We
do.
I
think it sounds good. I think the horn works. The only thing I don't know that I love the horns at the end of the song, but you know.
Maybe they'll fine tune that. Was that the thing in the preseason too? Was that the goal song in the preseason?
No, I know. I didn't hear it until opening night. So
that was a nice little surprise they sprung. So tell me, we're early on. We were shooting the shit a little bit before the show. We're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves, but at the same time, holy fuck, what an awesome start for the Red Wings. 3-1, 4 games in. What's your early reaction? What have you seen so far? Are you surprised by how things have looked early on?
Not surprised that they started well. They started well last year too, reasonably well at least. Surprised how it's happened though. Like I think the vision that certainly the people who wanted to be optimistic about this team, they wanted to believe in 4 scoring lines and some defense who could chip in offense and a Seattle Kraken-like model that could maybe account for not having these superstars by having good players throughout the lineup. If you were of that mind coming into the season, you are thrilled because that is everything that's happened and more. Alex DeBrincat's leading the NHL. I don't know where we're at right now. It's as we talk here on a Thursday night, but he was leading the NHL in points coming into the night. They've had 12 different goal scorers, tied for the league lead in goals, power plays clicking at a ridiculous rate. All that stuff is going to drop from where it's at. But the fact that it's happening to this point tells you that vision was not crazy. How much am I buying it? We'll see. Like, 4 games is really small. It's 20, 1/20th, 5% of the NHL season. Like, we got a long way to go. But I think my big takeaway is that there was merit to that idea that they could counteract not having these top end stars by having all this new depth. And so if you came into the season skeptical, I think you at least have to be considering maybe this can work.
Oh, I mean, speaking of skepticism, your colleague at The Athletic wrote one of the 10 most depressing articles of the year. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but you've referred to it before in your work, so I know you're familiar with the piece. It is a very, very difficult last name to pronounce. But is it Dom Wischusen?
I can spell it better than I can pronounce it.
They're both.
I think it's Luschichin.
That sounds better than mine. We'll go with that. Ben, throw up this. This is just on the eve of the season, talking about the Red Wings and the state of their rebuild and what he viewed as the poor state of the rebuild. Quote, the biggest problem with the Red Wings as currently constructed, the lack of an elite core, which is what makes this feel like a make or break year. Detroit is behind the curve. The Red Wings do not have players on the franchise level. That's Dom's take. What's your view here? Was that fair? Do you feel any differently a few games into the season? He doesn't seem too bullish on where the Red Wings are in their state of the rebuild right now.
Can we get that back up on the screen? Because I think if you could break down different parts of this.
Sure.
Biggest problems with the Red Wings is currently constructed, the lack of an elite core. I think that's a fact. If you have, I don't know who could disagree that they don't right now have an elite core. They don't have any players who you would currently say are even in the top 30 of the NHL, right? You would expect each team would have one. Doesn't always work out like that. Teams like Colorado have 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Detroit doesn't have one. I think they've got a couple in that next range, that 31 to 55, Larkin and Seider. Maybe DeBrincat's in there. Let's see what happens with some of their prospects. I think it's a stone cold fact that they lack an elite core. But I disagree with the next line, which makes us feel like a make or break here. I've talked to Dom about this piece. He's a friend of mine. He didn't mean make or break in terms of the whole thing, Yzerman on the hot seat if they don't make it, blah, 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 they got to make the playoffs. What he was getting at was, as I understand it at least, they've got to show that they have a plan to win without those pieces, right? And I think that's, again, to go back to what we talked about at the Open, I think that's, if you're an optimist, you're saying, yeah, they do. This is what it's going to look like, right? It's early. We'll see whether that's the case. But I didn't find that first line to be all that shocking. And so I get it's like intimidating, but I think that is what defined this moment in the Red Wings rebuild is, hey, when everyone was talking at the start of this rebuild about why you should be patient with this team and suffer the losses, it was because there was this kind of promised finish line where you come out of it with a McKinnon or a Matthews or a McDavid, right? It didn't. But I don't think that's the only way. It's just, it means you got to do it a little differently than you probably planned to at the outset. So I don't really view it as make or break, but I do think regardless of what happens this season, that's still a problem they're going to be working through in the coming years because they aren't built like that, classic coming out of the rebuild team, the New Jerseys, right? New Jersey comes out of their rebuild and they have 2 number 1 overall picks down the middle at center. On defense, they've got, Dougie Hamilton, who they didn't draft, but is a number 1 defenseman. Luke Hughes looks like he can be a number 1 defenseman. I'm on the lower end, I think, on Luke Hughes, but like the potential is obviously there. And they've got another top 2 pick defenseman in Simon Nemeth, right? Like that's how you envision yourself coming out of a rebuild. Detroit's not coming out of it like that. But you could certainly make a case that the teams that did come out of their rebuilds like that also haven't won like crazy yet, other than really Colorado. Tampa did it on the backs of guys who weren't, other than, they got Stamkos and Hedman. They're a bad example. But they had a lot of guys who weren't of that profile too. They whiffed on a lot of actually first round picks.
True, but I mean, Hedman, Kucherov, and Stamkos, they
cover up a lot for sure.
And then goal.
That's what I mean. They're not a
their
comparable.
top 4 guys were all drafted.
Totally, they're not a comparable for the Red Wings at this point.
And I mean, the Colorado example is great too because McKinnon, even going back to Landeskog, Makar, drafted. Their core has been guys they drafted, Rantanen too. Yeah. It's interesting because I like what Detroit's doing. I'm kind of in this same complicated relationship with that article as you are, where I'm doing some head nodding, but I'm also doing some wondering. I do think it is difficult. I don't know how much high-end multiple marquee players the Blues had or the Vegas Golden Knights last year.
Vegas didn't draft theirs. St. Louis didn't really draft theirs. They drafted Pietrangelo.
It was a lot of kind of B-plus players. So I do think there's another way to do it. I think it's better, though, if you can have 1 or 2 of those marquee players. What is their pathway, if there is one, to getting a marquee top 10 guy? Because I think we're already out of him, short of hitting Golden in the draft, in the middle of the round. We're kind of out of the lottery era, hopefully. Can they get that piece?
Well, when Vegas did it, it was by trade. They got Mark Stone that way. I don't know if he's not top 10, but I don't think you need top 10. There's only so few of those. And a lot of those top 10 guys, by the way, haven't won. Matthews hasn't won. McDavid hasn't won. Draisaitl hasn't won. I think Stone's elite, and I think Eichel is elite. Eichel at one point would have been talked about in that top 10. Maybe he can be again. Both of those guys were trades. I think that's a viable path. They if you think about the Red Wings, like now have this cast that I think it's better than what you could assemble in an expansion draft, but it's not totally dissimilar in terms of guys that other teams in a lot of cases let walk. Colorado didn't pay JT Compher. Winnipeg / the Rangers didn't pay Andrew Kopp. Robbie Fabry's had his, winding road to get here, right? Daniel Sprong, certainly, you could kind of piece together and say, hey, can this be their starting point as if it were an expansion? And then you're a little ahead because you get Raymond and Seider and Edvinsson and all that stuff in there. And you can say, okay, I'm going to throw out some names here. I don't know if Elias Pettersson is ever going to come available, but he's like a guy who's in the middle of this like RFA controversy. Is he going to sign or not? If he were to ever come free, are you now in the position to do what Vegas kind of did and make a big offer on Elias Pettersson? That's like the obvious path, right? It's like you make a trade for a guy who I think Elias Pettersson's in that top 30 tier. He would make the Red Wings, he would give them a top 4 forward core that does look like suddenly one of those threatening teams. And then the rest is kind of development. Like I think in Seider and Edvinsson, you could have 2 stud number 1 defensemen, and that's going to go a long way. That makes you more in the St. Louis mold where, okay, yeah, like Larkin's not McKinnon, but he can score more than Ryan O'Reilly for sure. And you get Nate Danielson, can he be your Braden Shen? And you got these 2 stud D. That's a path. So that's where I kind of deviate from Dom, is I do think there's another path there. But I have to say, seeing the reaction to his article, I do think there's a lot of people that were mad despite kind of maybe they don't want to admit, but they kind of know deep down there was a little validity to what he had written, even if not like the whole thing of just like, and they're like, oh, and that thing that I agree is true, like that could tank the Red Wings. That's kind of how I perceived it. I don't know if I'm off on that.
I mean, you made the point right up front. Who's the top 30 player? I'm a diehard Red Wings fan. Like I love the Red Wings. I can't look at any of these guys and say definitively top 30.
Yeah.
I mean, you might see a top 30 type production from DeBrincat, but there's more things than the box score. Seider, you mentioned, I agree, can certainly get there. I don't think anyone would argue he's there yet. So, yeah, the arguments there are fair. I just think they seem to be going more in that Vegas Golden Knight, St. Louis Blue mold where we're going to have a bunch of good and just try to have that carry us. I'm curious where they're at between the pipes. It seems kind of like a series of stopgaps and Husso and guys. I don't know if they had the franchise guy. Do you think it's Kosa? Is it Sebastian eventually? Where's that headed?
It's a great question. I thought that I might see at the start of this season with the steps that Kosa made a dominant performance from Sebastian Kosa at the Red Wings prospect tournament. That actually the opposite happened. He was not good there. And I thought he'd actually taken a step back from what he did at that tournament last year. Now it's a prospect tournament. We'll see. He had a great first game in Grand Rapids last weekend. So that's a good sign. If you asked me right now, predict is Sebastian Kosa like an above average NHL starter? I don't think I could tell you that I do think that right now. But he certainly has physical tools that could allow him to become it. But I don't by this stage, he's in his draft +3, I think. I think I just would want to see more results there to really feel like this is a future ace one guy. And I haven't. But it could still happen. Goalies are the most unpredictable position.
It's impossible.
Right. Your guy, Trey Augustine, could also be he could very well end up better than Kosa. He could very well end up a solid number one star. He doesn't have the freaky athleticism. So maybe that limits the upside, so to speak, but he's a really technically strong goalie. And I think he's almost the opposite of you see he's had the highest save percentage. And I think it was the highest in NTDP history for a U18 goalie last season.
Yes.
Stud, right?
Yep.
I think he's gonna be awesome at Michigan State this year. So they've got a couple irons in the fire, but slam dunk, I don't think there is that equivalent to what you would have with Seider and Edvinsson in net now.
Even that sort of conventional wisdom has shifted, and not to keep going back to my boys Colorado team, but we'll get Darcy Kemper and then Georgiev, and we'll kind of just try to get a bunch of B- guys through and cycle through and kind of build. That's not what it used to be like when we were coming up, man.
Totally.
You had to have Patrick Waugh.
Absolutely. I know you're familiar with my friend Prashant Iyer. This is his pet cause is don't use first round picks on goalies because you can go find Darcy Kemper or whatever when you need him. So you look at I hate to do this, but you look at the pick the Red Wings traded up from to go get Kosa. Wyatt Johnston, who's one of the best young centers, breaking into the league right now. And you just wonder, okay, if they had him, but it's a little too much revisionist. I get it, but that's why people are so skeptical of goalies in the first round is that, they can be predictable. And if you're not getting premium, right? We'll see what Jesper Wallstedt becomes. He was the other first round goalie that year and people love to compare him. It's a very possible that Jesper Wallstedt's also just an average NHL starting goalie. And you can argue whether that's really worth a first round pick when you can find an average starting goalie elsewhere. So I don't know.
It's the hockey equivalent of a running back in the first round for football. It drives me nuts. We've seen this again and again. It's just not a good bet. And people love citing the occasional outlier.
The Saquon Barkley.
Even that, really? They didn't even want to pay him. I mean, even the ultimate exception is sort of a meh exception. I know this is non-scientific, Max. One of my best friends growing up was at the win over Pittsburgh. Yeah. And he goes all the time. He's got a partial plan, but it's one of those 20 games a year partial plan. He said it feels a lot different down there this year. That it's the vibe in the building, the way the team looks, the pep. I know that's as unscientific as it can get, and I know we're on a small sample size. But you cover this team. You're in the room. You're around. You're at practice. Does it feel different to you this year versus years prior?
Honestly, yes. And one thing I noticed, so the first few times we've come into the locker room this season, one thing that jumped out right away is, number one, there were more players in there. And we didn't just walk into a silent room where everyone's you could hear the, tape ripping off of hockey sock or shin pad right away. Like they're talking to each other, they're laughing, they're playing kind of games, shooting tape into trash cans, and they're kind of. I think that is real, and I think that there is something to that. With last season, around the time they went on their win streak, they all kind of talked about the bonding that they did on that like out west trip, and kind of a couple guys got extensions on that trip and celebrating that, and I do think that played a role in the push that they made around that time is coming together. And you heard a lot of guys talking about entering this year. They felt like they were, even the new guys felt like they were really a part of it really fast. It sounds like they held a lot of kind of like watch parties for like football games, and they golfed and all this stuff that you expect NHL players to do. But maybe you don't, maybe you take for granted that like what it means for that guy coming to a new city to be a part of that before even day one of training camp. And it's probably the easiest thing in the world to overrate. And you're talking about how unscientific it is. I agree with all that, but to the point about does it feel different? It really actually does, in there at least. And we'll see how that goes. Things are really good right now. Like that's the other part of this. Like it is one thing when I covered some streaks where I'm sure they were losing 6, 7, 8 games in a row, and no wonder it's, you could hear a pin drop in there. So we'll see what happens when adversity comes, I guess. But in the early going, I actually have noticed that.
I mean, the captain, we're still in the status quo with Dylan Larkin having the C there. Is there something to say with his evolution as a leader, growth, that they're having more football watch parties? Is this something you're seeing with a change in him, or is it just the influx of new guys? What do you attribute it to?
I think that's probably a really good point. And I think he's definitely a part of that. And he's gotten to be older now, where I think that's probably a little more natural to like host all that stuff, as opposed to, how old was he when he was named captain? 25?
24, 25?
Yeah. So I don't know how old, I don't really remember how old the roster was at that point. Maybe there's something that's more natural. I don't know. They've also got like the leadership group is a little more stable now with like Kopp and Sherratt and Perron. Like those guys have been around and they probably have some experience. I don't think all the credit needs to go one place, but it sounds like, Dylan's a big driver of that from what I can kind of peripherally gather. So I do think that's probably a big part of the evolution there.
I think the center of the excitement really is Alex DeBrincat within the fan base. There's a number of factors, but I think he's number one. Certainly I can speak for myself and the group threads that I'm in. So just to give some perspective for those that don't know, you're an educated guy, you know this stuff. It's been a long time since we've had this kind of a guy here in terms of a goal scorer. And Ben, can you throw that up for us? Quite the drought it has been. The Detroit Red Wings have not had a 40-goal scorer since Marian Hossa scored 40 in 2009. They are the only team in the NHL without a single 40-goal scorer in that span, and that includes the expansion Kraken and Golden Knights, who were around for 5 seconds and had a 40-goal scorer.
That's right.
So this is first of all, it's insane to have gone that long without one 40-goal scorer, and some even good teams at the front end of that. I don't want to jinx it, but I mean, this year one, DeBrincat, is that going to end this year?
It seems like it. It's funny. One of my bold predictions in my article this year was that it would end and that it wouldn't be DeBrincat because it was going to be Larkin after DeBrincat got all the defensive attention. Early, I wish I could just go erase that. Won't and it will be Alex DeBrincat because it looks. I mean, everything's going in for him right now, and he looks really good. And not just as a shooter. I think I probably underrated what he might bring. Just in terms of getting onto pucks, he's quicker than I realized, and he just clearly thinks the game really well. I actually don't even think we've seen that line at full clicking yet. I think they're still really trying to make these plays to each other that, you could just get it on net and get a rebound or whatever. I think they're figuring each other out still, I think. And I think there's another level to come with that group. And so the fact that he gets out to this 5 goals in 4 games start, I mean, he's not going to score at that rate, but now he only needs 35 in the next 78 games. That almost feels automatic, doesn't it?
Oh, and this is not some fluke for him. He's
done it twice.
He's gone on these types of runs his entire career where, he'll have 5 goals in 8 games kind of thing. This is what he does. And maybe not quite to this level, but this is a guy that has scored at this clip before in long stretches. And I just think this is such an interesting guy for what they got him for. The fan perception, my perception, the sort of enduring reaction was, that's it in the trade, and obviously they subsequently signed him. Is it fair to say they kind of stole him? I mean, what did you make of that trade when it was announced?
Yeah, I do think that's fair to say. I think you have to really go back to the previous summer when Ottawa traded for him and what they gave up. They gave up the 7th overall pick that ends up being Kevin Korchinski, who's a really promising young defense prospect. Also, very could have easily been Marco Kasper if Ottawa stays at that spot, who the Red Wings picked. And that is a premium asset. And the Red Wings gave up a first-round pick in the trade, but it's this coming year's Boston pick. We'll see where that shakes out. I feel like at best that's a late teens pick. So already there, it's whatever the difference to trade up from 17 or 18 up to 7 is, which is a huge. We hardly ever see a trade like that because of how big that value gap is. And so, yes, you get one less year of certainty with him, team control, than what Ottawa did, but you immediately sign him to the deal because he wants to play in your city. Like this is the kind of break, right? The Red Wings don't have this advantage that teams like Dallas and Tampa and Florida get with the tax, no state income tax, right? But they do have that they are a hometown team for a lot of really good players. And so this is kind of their version of, I think, that advantage that, Adam Fox forces his way to New York. And what are you going to do about that? Like multiple other really good organizations had Adam Fox in their organization. I'm sure they had a feeling what they had, but they weren't going to be able to sign him. So he basically goes to New York, and New York looks genius, and they have Adam Fox. But like, this is kind of Detroit's version of that, I think, of like, you do have to feel a little bad for Ottawa, because I'm sure they thought that he would be signing that extension with them. But at the end of the day, he signed it in Detroit, and I think they did get a great deal on him. And I'm sure that at this point, there's people wishing he had signed that 4-year contract for more like 6 or 7 years. And that's totally fair too. It will put them in an interesting spot when that is up.
Yes.
But for the price you got him, like, it's almost, it's very hard for me to imagine a world where that does not look like a win at every stage of this 4-year contract.
It seemed like he gave some, message passed through either his agent or just himself that I'm not going to sign with any other team after a trade. I'm going to the market after as an expiring. I can't understand. It seemed like Ottawa was over a barrel is what I'm getting at. Why would they make this trade for what they did? It feels like they got robbed here.
Well, what are you going to do if you don't trade him? I mean,
that's the best somebody could do was with the Red Wings package. I'm thrilled. I'm not complaining. I can't. They stole him.
Yeah, I don't know what other offers they got on the table. I generally am a believer that the team will make the trade for the best offer they can get. The only variable, and I don't know this, is like, did other teams think that they were going to be able to sign Detroit?
Well, that's what I'm getting to, because teams would be reticent if they think it's just a rental.
Exactly.
If they have no shot. My inclination is that there was some type of an agent circles like he wants to go home to Detroit. So if you do trade for him, he'll play. He's not going to hold out. But
do you remember? There's these GMs vary on this widely, and I don't remember what it was in his case. Was he allowed to talk? His agent allowed to talk to other teams in pursuing this?
If he was, I don't think that was made public.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then you're leaving teams to guess.
They talk though, man.
I'm sure.
I'm telling you, they talk.
Well, I'm sure they do, but like. Yeah. Either way, either they made an educated decision to know that they didn't think that they would, or they were left to guess. And if they were left to guess, you could easily understand how they would think, well, a lot of people think he would want to be in Detroit. Like, are we going to be able to sign him? If you're not going to know that until you've made that trade, of course that's going to affect what your offer is. If you don't know whether you can sign a guy, even if it's possible, but you don't know, how can you give up 2 first-round picks before having it done? I don't remember what it was in the Stone case, and I think Ottawa was actually pretty happy to get Brandstrom, which looks horrible in hindsight.
Yeah, thanks.
Right? But I don't remember what it was in that case. But like all the GMs, like I get that they don't want to give this power to the agent to come to this deal because it can go the other way. It almost gives them a no trade clause if they don't have one. But you can understand how the other GMs would have low offers if they're left to kind of guess whether they can sign the guy or not.
Your article today was great, talking about DeBrincat as a game changer. Ben, can you throw up the excerpt from Max? I mean, I don't know. I read it today, Max. I think it was your article from today. DeBrincat is a kind of weapon the Red Wings haven't had in years. Even when he hasn't been the one scoring, the threat of his scoring touch has helped elevate Detroit's power play as a whole. I'm observing all the same things you are. It just seems like everybody's getting better looks at the net. He's already hooked up with Larkin on an incredible play in an on-man rush. Just how do you see it affecting the entire unit, even aside from DeBrincat in a vacuum?
Yeah, so a couple plays in the preseason that actually stood out where DeBrincat didn't have an angle and he gets the puck and he brings it down low to an angle he's not going to score from. But because they got to keep an eye on him, he makes this pass over to Larkin. I think it was 2 straight games across the crease, and it's just easy money for Larkin to flip that thing up in there. The benefit of a power play is they can't cover all of you. And if they're like having to even shade a little extra over to one side, DeBrincat has that left flank spot where he lines up and is lethal from, then it's just even more space for everybody else. So it can open that up. I thought you saw it on the Perron goal the other night that you played in the intro where he's down low and he goes to Larkin in the slot. Larkin gets a great look. And then even when that doesn't go in, like how are you covering Perron on the rebound because you're having to pay all this other attention? That, and I just think it draws your focus, right? And so the one thing I would say, and I've put this on Twitter, it hasn't mattered yet. Their power plays are like 46%. I think they have to be careful to not force feed it and make it predictable and allow teams shading onto him to be an effective strategy. It will require a little bit of movement, a little bit of creativity at some point. But right now, I think just the threat of him is having a big impact.
Is it smart to have Perron here? There's a lot of criticism from fans, blocking of the young guys. There's no first or second year guys on the roster. Perron has been one of the guys singled out I've seen frequently. What do you make of his presence here, just as an example of a guy that people are not thrilled about?
I think he's great. That's like one of the last places if I was a fan I would be directing my angst.
Have you seen that though?
For sure.
You've seen that. That's I'm not making
the funniest
that up.
thing to me is people talking about he looks slow. Yeah, did you watch him last year? Like he's not a fast guy. It's like an open running joke among the team. I did a whole article last
Luke
year. Luke
Robitaille is one of the slowest guys I've ever seen.
But like that's just not who he is.
Yeah.
Like it's it's like saying Alex DeBrincat. Yeah, but he doesn't look very tall. Like of course, like that's just not what he's built around, right? Yeah. Perron is one of the best wall players in the NHL. People can say, oh, wall play, like how much does that matter? Well, it matters a lot when you're retrieving pucks for scores, when you're down low. He's savvy, he's smart. He was their second leading scorer last season. Like the guy that they would call up if they didn't have Perron is maybe Jonathan Berggren, who's nothing like David Perron. And they, I get there needs to be a place for Jonathan Berggren to see what they have in him and all that, but he's not even getting that role. Like in their team. It's just like, to me, that's a total non-factor. He also has been a huge piece, I think, in ramping up the intensity that they practice with, which has started to translate. He's a huge room guy. Like all this stuff that like I know people got annoyed with, and they got really annoyed with it, especially on guys like Abdelkader, because it seemed like, and what else? Like, right? Like, but with Perron, like he was your second leading scorer. He's great down low. He wins pucks for your Stars. People seem to like playing with him. To me, that one's just like a non-issue.
I like Perron. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I was curious for your take, honestly, because I don't understand what people are talking about. Not everyone's going to play that style. I keep reading negative Perron stuff, and I'm like, oh, he's doing his job.
I've seen it too.
Yeah.
I think he's doing exactly what they need him to do.
I agree.
Yeah.
Tell me about the D-Corps, because, I mean, I can't get anybody in trouble. I know a hockey player. He said the D-Corps is the biggest question.
Okay.
He didn't rip him. He didn't criticize. He says he's looking at the roster. We were talking before the season. He goes, the D-Corps is the biggest question mark if I'm a fan of Detroit. Is that fair? What do you make of that?
I still think the biggest question's in net, but I think it's fair to question like the D-Corps, especially because like it was weird how they went about it too. Like I actually thought Edvinsson at the end of last year looked like, okay, he's hurt, so maybe you're not going to reserve a spot for him and you want to make him prove it. But it seemed like not out of their own possibility that he would do that. And so they come into the year loaded up with these 7 established vets that they're already having, like, sounds like, at least from what they tell us, like a hard time deciding who to scratch. What I think they have is they have a top pair, and I think Jake Wallman is a legit top pair guy with Moritz Seider. And then I think they kind of have, well, how does it leave? 5, like 4-5 defensemen, basically, right? So it's like, none of those are going to amount to the second pair that you would really envision on a contender, on a really good playoff team. But their third pair, I think, is going to be solid no matter who it is. Gostisbehere's out to a good start. I actually think Sherratt's out to a really good start. Speaking of guys that fans like to take shots at, I thought he's had a really good start.
I didn't like the Sherratt thing, but...
No, I get it, but to start this season, I think he's looked really good. He had a tough year last year, obviously, and but I thought he's looked really good to start, and his physicality made, I thought, a huge impact on the Pittsburgh game last night. Petrie, we'll see. Like that was an interesting trade. That was the last piece in, and He's got a little more jam than I think I realized too, but has also made some mistakes in the early going.
Not a Petrie guy.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Like he's another one of those guys that I think he can maybe be the number 2 guy on the number 2 pair, but if you're asking him to carry the second pair, you're nervous. And then Mata's just like steady, but that's that 4-5 classic. Gostisbehere's a specialist. Justin Hall, I think he's been better than I expected, but I think you're happiest with him as a third pair guy, ideally. But some of these guys got to play your second pair, and they're going to have to work it out. It's been Sherratt and Petrie most often. But I think it's fair to say like that's, especially that second pair, like it's just, you want 2 of those guys to elevate. And can any of them do it? I think Edvinsson's the most likely one to do it, but he's not in Detroit right now.
What's their cap situation going forward? Can they acquire some salary this year? Even, let's forget free agency next year. Can they add salary at this point?
Yes, they can. It's a really good free agent class. So if you do it, that's your guy. You're doing it because this is what we would wanted to do. They got money coming off. Perron's up. Like they have some maneuverability there. They got to get the Sider and Raymond deals done, but they can if they want to. It's just they are no longer in the space that they were the last time I was on with you, where it was like, do whatever you want. You can't mess this up, right, basically on any one deal, right? Now they've given out some medium-term deals. Kopp's got 3 more years after this one. Comfort's got 4 more years after this one. Sherratt, I think, is 2 more years after this one. Some of those deals have a little bit of term on them now, so not as much maneuverability, but they still can. I don't have the number in front of me. I forget what it is. I want to say it's like 6 or 7 million. But I could check Cap Friendly or something while you talk if you want.
No, that's good. We're just trying to get a ballpark because my sense is that they can add a significant piece or 2.
They could. Yeah. I don't expect they're going to do that though. I still don't think, even if they're in the playoff hunt, I don't think you're going to see Steve Yzerman like trading a first round pick to get a $7 million guy.
What about free agency next year? How about that?
Maybe. And I gave the example. If some star is available and they can get him, I'm not saying they wouldn't do it, but I think it would have to be someone who's going to be with them, who's still in their young age range. It's someone who's going to be around with them for a while. They're not that invested, from my perception, in 2023-24. If they can do well in 2023-24 and it's part of where they're headed, sure. But in terms of it would probably depend on the player and the contract in terms of whether they would do that.
Do you perceive that they have to make the playoffs this year from a fan perception standpoint?
No, but it's trending more and more that way each year, I think. I hear more of it each year. I don't think so. I think I predicted them with 88 points. I don't know how fans would feel at that range, because then you're probably picking 11th, 12th. You didn't come that close to the playoffs. That might be an itchy spot for them to be. But if they're at 90, 92, and they're like 5 points out of the playoffs, I think fans are going to feel like right there, kind of maybe not quite like where the Lions fans felt this offseason. I think they kind of knew they could win the division potentially.
Yes.
But more like that of like right there, and you got these prospects. Danielson looked really good in the preseason. Like, is he going to come in and be a factor? Edvinsson by next season, I think, should certainly be a factor. That, I think, is like, to go back to that optimist point, like if they're a 90 to 95 point team, I don't think they are, but 90, 92, let's say this year, and you still have 3 top 10 picks that haven't like become full timers for you yet, I do think you feel really good about that if that's where you're at as a franchise. And Carter Mazer, who was not that high of a pick, but I think looks like one of those finds in the 3rd round, then you can really feel like, okay, the Red Wings are decent and they got more on the way that's potentially maybe not elite talent, but like upper lineup talent.
I think it's worth pointing out the Tampa Bay timeline with Yzerman was already done, and they were in the Stanley Cup Finals. I believe they won the finals on the same timeline. That would have been like them winning last year.
No, they didn't win that soon.
Was that the year they lost in the finals?
It must be, because
they were 100% in the finals.
Yeah,
I'm not going to look it up.
When they lost. They didn't win until he left, so he never won a cup with them.
No, I know, but I'm saying his timeline from years from when he got there to when maybe it was when they lost in the finals.
It's got to be.
They were in the finals though.
Yeah. So because he gets there, 2010.
That was the year they lost the finals. I'm confirming that. But either way, I'm 100% sure they were in the finals.
Yeah. Well, they had Stamkos and Hedman. I mean, that's just kind of, it's a different ball game.
Yeah, and, Kucherov, who he stole, and Vasilevsky, who he stole. So, we haven't really seen that equivalent yet. But here's the argument for Yzerman in defense of him, and I'm still an Yzerman guy. I've argued forget hockey. In my life as a sports fan, the Detroit Red Wings rebuild was the single most difficult rebuild I've ever seen. Capped out, very little talent on the roster, nowhere to go for like 3 years. Is that an insane takeaway to say that? Whether you say it's the literal worst or one of the worst, this was an extremely difficult rebuild that he inherited. Is that fair?
Oh, it's absolutely fair. I mean, there's no doubt. And what I look back on, this was one of my, I did a year on the Tigers. I had done a little bit of time on Michigan. I was still 23, I think, when I started on this beat. I so naively looked at like what they had in place and was like, well, you know, Anthony Mantha, a good player, like maybe he'll be a core piece, right? And it's like you look back in hindsight and you're like, wow, like it was gonna be a long road, right? The young core that I thought I was looking at was the core that was gonna be dealt away to get the young core, other than Larkin, basically. I think you're spot on. I think they were in a spot that was always gonna be a long road. And maybe it's just one of those things that when you're looking at it, you know, you can't really conceive of that, whether it's without experience or context or whatever. But I think you're spot on.
What's the Stanley Cup timeline for this team, realistically?
I don't know, because of that, what we talked about at the outset of just like it doesn't seem like they're following the dreamy version of this rebuild. Like if they continue kind of how they've started this season, which like I don't mean like 46% power play winning 3/4 of their games. I just mean like to look like they're a this level of like kind of competent offense. I think you could see them once they get kind of those Danielson, Edvinsson, Kasper, Mazur pieces in, which you want to give those guys time to be rookies. You know, probably still 3-4 years, I think. And that's if
that's a long time.
For Stanley Cup, though, right? Like, it wouldn't shock me if they're in the playoffs a year from now.
How about this year? Push. Why can't we make it this year?
I'm not saying it's like less than a 20%. I think Dom had it at 14% chance. I would say it's more like 25%, but that's just my gut, you know? Like, it wouldn't stun me.
Yeah.
But I just think the East is really, really strong. Like, are they better than Ottawa? Are they better than Buffalo? I don't think right now we can say definitively, certainly, that they are. They're going to go play Ottawa this weekend. I think that's going to be an awesome game. I mean, especially how it went there last year, but it's a great measuring stick. But like, there's other teams I feel like that are in line ahead of them to make this jump that Ottawa absolutely has every right to feel as good, if not better, about their young pieces as the Red Wings do. So I still do think we're talking 3 more years till we're talking about like, can they win the Stanley Cup? But I'm not saying like if we've seen it, if you get in, you got a chance.
Hockey's weird, man. How many 8 seeds? I mean, the Kings not only won as an 8 seed,
right?
They were up 3-0 in all 4 of their playoff series.
Yeah.
I mean, they just ran over everybody, and they were on the outside looking into the playoff picture like 10 days before the playoffs began.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, we've seen the Flames go all the way to the finals as an 8 seed, the Ducks all the way to the finals as an 8 seed. It's a weird playoff format and sport, and it's so hard to win, and it's a quirky. I think next year, I'm not predicting it, but I'm saying if they add a piece or two to the group next year, that could be one of those weird teams that goes on a run. I'm more optimistic, I think, than you are.
Yeah, that might be. I mean, I don't think it's inconceivable that they could be a 98, 100-point team next season, and that's a team that has a chance. Like, no doubt about it. But it's just like when I talk about like Stanley Cup contender, I'm thinking of the 6 or 7 teams that you go into the start of year thinking they can win, right? And we could probably rattle who those are off right now: Dallas, Colorado, Carolina, New Jersey, Toronto, right?
No San Jose.
Vegas, yeah, not San Jose, right? So there's 6 or 7 of them, you know, that you really feel like they can win it. We could argue who they are, but like that's who I talk about when I talk about like a Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I think that's a fair characterization. I would not put Detroit in one of those 6 or 7, you know, for the discussion next year. I just think they have a lot of that St. Louis, Vegas thing that worked. It just that seems to be the model, whether it was by accident or intentional. That seems to be where we're at. I could argue, I mean, the Lafreniere lottery that they lost, quote unquote, I don't know, they may have gotten the better player there.
I think they did.
Yeah.
The only question is, would they have taken Tim Stützle, right? The year after they take the surprise German, would they have, if they had won that lottery or taken second or even third, would they have taken Tim Stützle, who looks like maybe he's already a 90-point center in this league.
Yeah,
at the same
he's
age.
awesome.
Yeah, so like that's the question. But you're right. Like if you were sitting there on lottery night lamenting they didn't get Alexi Lafreniere. This rebuild is doomed. Well, they're actually better off than if they had.
Much better. And that was the Raymond draft, wasn't it?
That's right.
At 4?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's like, I don't think they probably would have taken Raymond. They probably would have gone with the Stutzla, but it's interesting how these things can seem so horrifying in the moment. Seider, we were all kind of, Seider didn't think he was going to get taken in that spot.
It was stunning. Yeah.
You remember the famous...
And I think he would go, in my opinion, our prospect guy, Corey, just did his redraft. I think he had him going 5th. I think he would go 2nd, in my opinion. If he redrafted.
I got to see it.
He's got like the centers, right? And then the, Zegras and Cousins. Cousins, I think, is underrated by the public for how good he is.
Was that the Byfield draft?
No, that was the Jack Hughes draft. So
okay.
He'd go Jack for sure, number 1.
Yes.
In my opinion, I think Mo would go number 2 in that draft. But it's up for debate. He's somewhere in that next group of 3 or 4.
Yeah.
That would include Cousins, Zegras, maybe Cole Caulfield, Matt Boldy.
Yeah, fair. I don't know. Yeah, have you come around on Owen Power at all?
Yes, I've always liked Owen Power. It was just that I didn't think he was a guy worth tanking for. Right?
I know. I've mischaracterized your position.
No, it's but like I do think he looks like a legit number 1. He just got paid $8 million a year. Like that's obviously a number 1 pick.
I think they overpaid him a little bit. That's me saying that.
I think it's going to look good in a couple of years.
Well, I agree. Well, overpaid him in anticipation of future growth.
Which I think is the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think you kind of have to in their position. So
I think the Red Wings are going to regret not doing that with Seider, paying him a little bit sooner. This previous. Now maybe they couldn't. I guess I shouldn't say that. Like they didn't make an offer and he didn't say I want to have my 3rd year and see what I do. But I think the bill on Seider will be at least $500,000 more on the cap per year. Whenever it happens, because it happened after Sanderson and Power, 2 really good players, comparable draft slots, comparable profiles, who have done less offensively, which I think is a huge part of how contracts get tabulated at the time of signing, than Seider had. If Seider had signed, I think this summer, I think the number probably comes in that Sanderson Power range. I don't know how he doesn't get more than that now, assuming it's a long, 7-8 year deal.
I want to finish here. Whenever Detroit gets to Cup contention, whether it's next year, 3 years from now, whatever timeline, do they have the coach in place right now behind the bench that's going to get them there? Is he going to be there when they're ready for that?
They just might. I mean, you never know because coaching is the most, I think, fickle thing in sports where like it's so easy to blame a coach. It's so easy to decide, well, that's the easiest thing to change. Something gets off and the coach is the one that wears it. Like it's so hard to know, but I think there's a real chance because I didn't really think that Lalonde could get as much out of that group that he got up to that point in Ottawa last season, where they were in a playoff spot in late February. I would not have told you at the start of last season that was possible. And so that tells me he is doing something right. He's pushing some right buttons. We see all the time, like, how long can one specific kind of like message or style work with one group? Like, we're getting to the point where the Bednars and the Brindamores are the exception. Bruce Cassidy got so long in Boston before and was so successful there, and they still let him go, right? So you never know with coaches, but I've been really impressed with Derek Lalonde, and I think there's a chance that is the case. Is
Lalonde more players coach or more kind of?
I don't know. Like I
can't get a read on him.
Like certainly, I think he talks about his best strengths as being a communicator. So I think that would tell me players coach, but I don't think that means he's not demanding. And so is he demanding in the way of like a Tortorella? Like I don't get that read off of him.
No, he's the gulag coach. So yeah. But everyone's below that bar.
But I think that he's kind of got a mix there. I think he is. I think he does hold a high standard here for these guys, and he's not just just being the best friend again outside, but from what I kind of observe and. I think he does hold them to account. I think he holds a line, but I do think he views it as he's a communicator. Everything that I, have heard about kind of those interactions, I think that checks out. So maybe a little hybrid. I don't know. Probably. I think Dan Watson, the guy they just hired in Grand Rapids, like you hear players coach, and I see that really clearly in the way that he at least communicates with us. And Lalonde and Watson, I think, have a strong relationship. But I would imagine you're seeing a little bit of Lalonde kind of rubbing off on how his style played out. But it doesn't really answer your question. But I do think
it does. I mean, it's a little bit of a question. I can't figure it out. Yeah. I had a good read on Blashill. Everyone knew Babcock was an ass, but I still can't figure out this guy. Max Bultman, thanks for joining us. before round 1 of the playoffs, maybe you'll join us when the Red Wings are starting their run this year.
We'll make that work, yeah.
Don't be a stranger.
And don't send a rogue booker for me.
I didn't send anybody. That was Cali Tickets going rogue on his own. I had nothing to do with that, but I'm glad he did. He facilitated the reunion here. It's great. Great to have you again.
Absolutely. Been great to be here.
Max Bultman, The Athletic. Thanks so much. Spiro Avenue Show, Justin Spiro. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Eric. Later.